I was 27 the night the train left the rails, but I stopped aging at that moment. The world has kept moving. Clocks still tick, calendars still flip their indifferent pages. But inside me there is only one night, one tunnel, one sound that never stops echoing. People call me the lucky one. They shake my hand, smile with relief, pat my back, tell me God chose me. They don't know that every time I close my eyes, I hear the metal scream again. I smell the burning plastic, and I see faces pressed against the dark like photographs that refuse to fade. I had boarded with nothing special in mind. Just another trip home after days of work, carrying a bag full of papers and a head full of tiredness. The carriage was half empty, and yet I remember every stranger. Because tragedy forces memory to become cruelly perfect. The old man with the newspaper folded on his lap, who smiled when I sat down. The young couple whispering, holding hands as if they had invented love that evening. The woman with her little daughter in a red coat, humming a tune to keep her calm. And me, anonymous among them, believing I was no one's witness. The crash began with a sound no one recognized. A jolt, a vibration in the rails, something wrong but invisible. Then the world tilted. Gravity forgot its rules, and we became weightless and heavy at once. Screams didn't even have time to form properly. They were cut in half by the thunder of steel tearing itself apart. I remember the window exploding beside me, the night rushing in, cold air mixed with sparks. My head struck something, I don't know what, and suddenly I was crawling through broken glass, hands raw, lungs clawing for air. Around me, voices pleaded, cried, then stopped. The silence after was worse than the noise. I woke hours later outside, in the mud beside the wreckage. Sirens painted the darkness red and blue. They pulled me out like a relic, their voices full of relief. He's alive. And I wanted to tell them no, not really, not in the ways that matter. They wrapped me in blankets, carried me away, asked me questions I couldn't answer. Who were you sitting next to? What did you see? I remembered the red coat, the couple, the old man. I said nothing because saying their names in my head already felt like betrayal. The newspapers the next morning called it a miracle that I had survived. They used the word fate. They said destiny had spared me. But no one wrote about how destiny cursed me too. Survivors carry more than scars. We carry the unfinished voices of those who didn't walk out, and mine follow me still. At night, when the city quiets, I hear the small girls humming, broken by the sound of metal. I see her mother's arms stretched out, reaching for someone she would never hold again. I see the couple, eyes wide, love suspended forever in a question. I see the old man's folded newspaper, blood soaking through the headlines no one would ever read. People tell me I should be grateful. And sometimes, in daylight, I almost convince myself. But when the dark arrives, I understand I did not survive. I am only what remains. The hospital taught me that survival has paperwork. They asked me to list allergies emergency contacts, the name of a person who should be called in case, and I stared at the clipboard as if the questions were written in a language I had once known and had since betrayed. A nurse with kind hands cleaned the small cuts on my knuckles as if she were erasing sentences I hadn't meant to write. In the bed across the curtain, a TV murmured through the night, aerial shots of the wreck, split screens of anchors with grave voices, a ticker that called me a miracle. I wanted to stand up and correct the spelling of that word, tell them it didn't to have glitter, it had glass. Sleep came in short, broken pieces. Each time I closed my eyes, the carriage tilted again. Gravity let go, and the breath that left me then keeps leaving me still. When morning arrived with its polite light, an investigator sat down beside my bed with a notebook and the sort of patience that can be mistaken for mercy. He asked me to tell him everything I remembered, and I did, carefully, ashamed of how much I remembered and how little it helped. He asked about a sound just before the tilt, a metallic shiver in the rail, a new vibration. I said yes. He wrote something down and pressed his lips together. The expression of a man assembling a truth that will take someone's job and never give back the dead. Before he left, he slid a card onto my tray and said, "If any detail returns, no matter how small, call me." As if the return of details were a favor I could grant instead of an inevitability that would strip me of sleep for months. The days after tasted like burned plastic. My phone filled with messages from people I hardly knew. Relatives, colleagues, an ex who wrote, "I'm so glad you're okay," without a period. As if the sentence couldn't bear to stop, reporters called and called. One waited outside my building with a bouquet, the strangest offer. Flowers for a man who could not touch petals without feeling the drag of torn paper across his palms. I did not go home right away. I walked first to the temporary memorial near the station, a wide board of scrawled condolences, candles collapsing into their own wax, photographs held to wood by pushpins that looked too small to hold so much. There she was, the little girl in the red coat, the one who hummed in the carriage. Her name was Aya. In the photo she squinted against too bright daylight, a bandage like a small flag on her knee. Beside her, her mother, Layla, unsmiling in the restrained way of people who have learned to keep their joy quiet. I touched the cold head of a candle and pulled my hand back quickly, because the mind can make any surface hot. "I'm sorry," I said aloud, to the board, to the pushpins, to the bandage on the knee. No one turned. A man stood 3 feet away with his hands in his pockets, reading every name, his lips moving. We were a choir of one-person prayers. Back at my apartment, the door key felt heavier. Everything inside had the insult of being exactly where I left it. Dishes that had not broken. A plant that had not died. A couch ready to accept the same tired body as last week. I sat on the floor instead and listened to the hallway. Sounds of unremarkable life, an elevator sighing, a neighbor's laugh felt like trespass. I tried the therapist the hospital recommended. "Trauma interrupts narrative," she said gently. "It takes your sense of time and hands it a pair of scissors." She asked me to tell the story without the crash, to practice reinventing a before that didn't end in screams, but my mouth had become a hallway with only one door and it kept closing. I attended a support group in a church basement with a coffee urn that smelled like the 70s. We used first names only, and even those shook. A man who had lost his brother kept wiping the same clean mark on the table with his thumb. A woman described her dreams like stops on a subway line. Station panic, station rage, station blank window. When it was my turn, I said the word lucky out loud and it sounded like I dropped a glass and then lied about it. Afterward, on the crooked stairs, a voice said my name the way you say a word you don't want to be heard. I turned and met Layla. She had the same steady mouth as in the photo, the same direct eyes. She didn't say you were there. She said, "You saw her." And I understood that she meant more than vision. We sat on the steps together, uncomfortably close to the smell of mop water and old hymnals. "How did she hum?" she asked, and it was the simplest, strangest request of my life. "Like a song she was still making," I said. "Not a tune, a pattern." She kept starting over, but not because she forgot. "Because she liked the beginning." Layla nodded. Her hands were empty and unbearable. "Tell me something else," she said. And so I told her everything I could bear to hold in my mouth. The way Aya's red sleeve had a loose thread that she wound around her finger. The way she lifted her feet when the conductor walked past, as if she were not supposed to be counted. The way she tilted her head to hear the train talk. When I finished, Leela closed her eyes for a long time. "Thank you," she whispered, and those 2 words landed in me with the weight of a grown child. The investigator called again. The word maintenance arrived first, then budget, then schedule. Each one like a step down a stair someone had forgotten to finish building. He asked if I would sign a statement, testify if needed. "It matters," he said. I didn't trust that word anymore, but I said yes because saying no felt like joining the side that had already won. That night the humming came back, louder, as if I had invited it, and I did not ask it to leave. I lay on the couch and tried to hum with her, off key, off time, letting my breath be broken on purpose. Sleep came like a cheap curtain. I dreamed of rails that could be trusted and woke to the sound of my radiator arguing with itself. The first letter arrived a week later. Handwritten. Careful. No return address. You don't know me. My brother was in car 4. They say you're the one who remembers. Please remember him. It was both plea and order, and I did not know how to refuse either. More letters followed. Emails with subject lines that felt like pressure wounds. Tell me if you saw her bag. Was he afraid? Did anyone hold my mother's hand? I answered what I could without lying, and sometimes silence was the only honest reply. The reporter with the bouquet found me again on the street and asked if she could film a short interview for the community. I said no. She pointed her lens at my refusal as if that were the story. I went home and unplugged my doorbell. Days learned a new shape. Wake, remember, try to eat, fail, remember, read the investigators' updates, remember, avoid trains, remember. I counted my steps the way a child does on sidewalks, as if numbers could turn the day into a game I knew the rules to. On the second Thursday, my phone rang with a number I did not know and a voice that did. "This is going to trial," he said. "Not the worst thing you've heard, but not easy. They'll want to make you forget the sound you heard. Don't let them." After I hung up, I walked until my feet decided I was done. I ended at the river without plan. The wind there is a different person than the wind in streets. It feels like it knows names. I said Aya out loud and the river said it back without mockery. I said the old man's name too. I had learned it from the memorial board, and the couples and the conductors. I spoke them like I was inventing an alphabet where grief is a vowel. That night, I returned to the memorial and found Layla again, standing with a paper cup of tea going cold in her hand. We didn't say hello. We looked at the board. A volunteer had replaced the soggy photos with laminated ones. Aya's red coat shone in the streetlight in a way that made me angry. "They're going to ask you things that make you feel like you were failing her," Leela said, as if we had been in the same conversation for a week. "You can't fail her." I didn't trust my voice, so I nodded. "Can you come with me?" I asked, and was ashamed, but she surprised me by saying, "I need to hear the questions too." We agreed to meet at the courthouse steps on Monday. She left, and I stayed to watch the candles do their small, stubborn work. A storm threatened. I covered a few flames with my hands and burned my fingertips holding the heat in place. The pain felt like proof. I was here. I could still be touched by this world. When I finally slept again, the train tilted, yes, but this time a hand grabbed mine in the dark and held it. I woke with my fingers curled around nothing and realized I had been practicing for Monday in my sleep. Somewhere between midnight and morning, the humming changed. It had always sounded like the beginning of a song. Now it sounded like a door I would have to walk through knowing there was no floor on the other side and walking anyway. The first time I returned to the station, it felt like walking into a throat that had already swallowed me once. The boards had been replaced. The lights restored. The timetables obediently scrolling departures and arrivals, as if nothing had happened, but my body knew. My chest tightened the moment I stepped onto the platform. The rails gleamed too brightly, polished like lies, and the tannoy voice announcing destinations sounded hollow, as if it had been trained not to remember. People brushed past me carrying suitcases and coffee cups, and none of them looked at the scar in the floor where the rescue crews had cut through steel. I stood there until my knees trembled, waiting for someone to call me out. "You shouldn't be here." But no one did. The living don't recognize their own ghosts. At first I thought I came back out of guilt, but later I realized I came to test whether the world still functioned without the dead. It did, efficiently. Trains arrived, swallowed passengers, departed. The same pattern that had killed so many kept rolling forward, indifferent. I closed my eyes and the night came back. The tilt, the scream, the air rushing in with glass. When I opened them again, I was still standing, which felt like mockery. A man brushed against me and muttered, "Sorry." I almost laughed. The newspapers had already chosen my role, the miracle survivor. My name was printed in bold, alongside words like fate, chance, destiny. Reporters camped outside my apartment, cameras eager for my trembling, for tears they could edit into their storylines. I avoided them, slipped down side streets, wore hats pulled low, but recognition grew. Strangers stopped me in shops, in the street, their faces full of borrowed relief. "God saved you," they would say. "Don't waste the gift." And I nodded politely, though inside I wanted to scream. It wasn't a gift. It was a debt. The letters from families kept coming. Some polite, some desperate. "Did you see him? Did she cry? Did someone hold her hand?" They treated me as if I carried photographs inside my head they could borrow, as if I had chosen survival in order to testify. At night, their questions became voices in my dreams. I would wake sweating, whispering answers into the dark that never felt enough. One evening I found Layla again at the memorial, standing alone with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. We didn't greet each other. We just stood in front of Aya's picture, laminated now against the rain. She asked me quietly, "Do you still hear her?" And I couldn't pretend. "Yes," I said. She nodded, her lips tightening as if bracing against wind. "Then you're carrying her for me." I wanted to refuse, to hand the burden back, but the truth is I already was. I had remembered too much, too precisely. Every gesture, every hum, every thread of her red sleeve was alive in me. We sat together on the low wall near the candles. She told me about Aya's stubbornness, how she would insist on starting songs again and again, how she loved beginnings. She asked me to describe again how her daughter hummed on the train. I repeated it, not a melody but a pattern, always circling back to the start. Layla closed her eyes and whispered, "That was her. Always starting." For a long time we said nothing, just watched the flames bend in the wind. When I finally spoke, it was a confession I hadn't made even to myself. "I think people believe I survived because I was stronger." But I wasn't. I was closer to the window. Layla looked at me then, and her gaze was sharper than grief. "Strength has nothing to do with who walks out. Survival isn't proof of virtue. It's a burden that chooses at random. And now you have to choose what to do with it." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, when the humming returned in my sleep, I didn't fight it. I let Aya's voice echo through the wreckage of my memory, circling back to the beginning over and over. It hurt, but it was also a strange kind of prayer. I realized then that I wasn't just remembering for myself anymore. I had become the keeper of voices that no one else could hear. A reluctant guardian, perhaps, but a guardian all the same. The next morning, I wrote a sentence in my notebook without thinking. I did not survive. I was appointed. And when I looked at those words, I understood the tragedy of it. Because survival, when it chooses you, doesn't release you. It enlists you. The courthouse had the clean smell of wood polished to impress the living and discourage the truth. I arrived early because sleep had been a place I could not enter. And I stood at the bottom of the stone steps until Layla appeared, each footfall measured like a promise she refused to rush. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. She handed me a paper cup of tea that had traveled without spilling and said, "You know what you heard." I nodded, though the nod felt borrowed from a steadier man. Inside, the investigator met us with a brief, relieved look that made me want to succeed for him too. "They'll attack the timeline," he said under his breath, "and your certainty about the vibration. Stay with the small things. Small things don't lie." I had imagined courtrooms my whole life. Television taught me to expect a theatrical honesty performed between flags, but this one felt more like an airport lounge that had been taught to keep its voice down. The company sat at one table with their lawyers' perfect suits pens that looked heavier than responsibility, and the state sat at the other. The investigator beside a woman with tired eyes and a stack of files that seemed to be arranged in the order of grief. When they called my name, I walked the aisle as if into a tunnel, and the smell of dust and paper turned instantly into metal and smoke, and the cold rush of night through a broken window. I had to tell my legs to keep moving. I had to tell my hands to behave. "Raise your right hand." I did. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" The ritual felt at once too small and too large. "I do," I said, and a ripple perhaps no one else heard it passed through me, like the rails shiver returning to check whether I still deserved to speak. The prosecutor began gently, a path cleared of stones. My name, my age, where I had been sitting, who I had noticed. I told them about the old man with the folded newspaper, the couple whispering, the small girl in the red coat humming beginnings. Then she asked about the sound. "Describe it," she said. I closed my eyes and the tunnel came back. "A tremor," I said, not loud, felt more than heard. Like a zipper pulled the wrong way. The floor reconsidered itself. She nodded. and I saw the jurors lean forward almost imperceptibly, bodies remembering their own physics. Then the defense rose, and the room's temperature altered by a degree only fear can measure. The man wore a kindness that had been ironed into him, and he approached as though I were an injured animal needing a calm voice. "You've been through a terrible ordeal," he began, a sentence with oil on it. "Would you agree that memory, especially under trauma, can be imprecise?" I said yes, because refusing would be both untrue and impolite. He showed me a diagram of the train, a neat arrangement of rectangles pretending to be fate, and asked me to mark exactly where I sat. I did. He replaced the diagram with maintenance logs, columns, and check marks that glowed with the confidence of paperwork. "You understand, sir, that the rails had been inspected the day before. No anomalies recorded." I looked at the page the way you look at a photograph where the dead still smile. "I understand that's what this paper says," I replied. "And yet something was wrong." He smiled with pity so practiced it almost convinced me. "Is it possible what you felt was the first impact itself, the derailment mistaken in your mind as a warning before the fact?" The question was a trap wrapped in logic, and I felt my mouth begin to answer as the polite student I have always been. Then Leela shifted in the second row, just a breath and attention, and the small movement steadied me. "No," I said. "The warning came before the breaking. That is why I remember it. You don't forget the second that could have saved you." A silence took the room and sat down. The lawyer's expression thinned. He moved to photographs, to speed readouts, to the authority of numbers. He asked me if I could truly distinguish the sequence under such chaos. I said the body keeps its own archive, and mine had filed that tremor under before. At lunch, the company sent a messenger without a tie to the hallway where I stood with a plastic fork that would not choose a piece of fruit. He handed me an envelope. "They'd like to speak after this," he murmured. "Off the record." Inside, a card with a name embossed so deep it left an impression on the paper beneath it. Beneath that, a promise written in legal, trauma counseling, a fund for survivors, a statement crafted to avoid further pain, if I would clarify that I could not be certain the tremor preceded the event. It was an elegant way to buy a second of time. Layla took the card, read it once, then folded it in half with a pressure that looked like prayer. "They want to turn your doubt into their absolution," she said. The investigator joined us, eyes alert. "You don't owe anyone certainty," he told me quietly. "Only the truth as your body knows it." I held the folded card until it cut the skin of my palm and left a small mirror of their name there. Then I dropped it in the trash. Afternoon returned with harder light. The defense tried a different angle. My press interviews, there were none. My therapy sessions, private. My letters from families, irrelevant and yet paraded in a way that made my ears burn. "Isn't it true," he said, "that you now see yourself as a guardian of these voices, as you call them? Could that role be influencing what you think you remember?" The word guardian sounded foolish in his mouth, and for a second I wanted to disavow it. But the humming rose in my memory again, Aya's small insistence on beginnings. And I realized the trap inside the kindness. If they could laugh me out of the role I had accepted, perhaps I would laugh myself out of remembering. "Yes," I said evenly. "I am a guardian. Not because I chose it, because I was appointed by surviving. And no, it does not change what happened before. It changes whether I keep showing up after." He asked me then about God. The jury shifted at the word. Men and women who had been taught not to bring church into state, but carried it anyway in the pocket of their ribs. "You've been called a miracle," he said. "Doesn't that title suggest the event was beyond mere human failure?" The trick had two edges, both sharp. I breathed and said, "If I'm a miracle, it's a cruel one. But I don't need a word to explain why a bolt wasn't tightened, or a schedule was favored over safety. My survival doesn't absolve neglect." I felt the judge look at me for the first time as if I were more than a witness. When they finally released me, I sat in the empty corridor with my head in my hands and felt the tremor again. This time in my bones, a ghost of the rail knitting itself into me so I would never misplace the timeline no matter how many diagrams they drew. Layla joined me. We watched a custodian move a mop across a width of tile with the patience of someone who has learned how to leave a place cleaner than they found it. "You didn't fail her," she said. I wanted to believe her. "I didn't save her either," I said. She didn't argue. "No one saved her," she answered. That's why we speak. Outside, the sky had been holding its rain like breath and finally let go. We stood under the courthouse awning, two people who did not believe in omens and yet could not help reading the weather. Reporters waited at the bottom of the steps with their practiced concern and lenses that could smell weakness. I thought of the card in the trash, of the embossed name impressed into cheaper paper, of the offer to clarify. My palms still carried the shallow cut. I raised them to the rain and let the water rinse the mark until it blurred. "They'll come again," Layla said. "With different envelopes." I nodded. "Then I'll keep my hands wet." On the way home, I stopped at the station without meaning to. The tannoy announced trains as if tragedy had taught it nothing and everything at once. A child nearby hummed to herself different tune. Same stubborn beginning, and the sound found the exact rib under which I store Aya. I stood there long enough to feel the rails under my feet. Steady for now. Their confidence no longer a lie, but a promise that would need to be checked again and again. The investigator texted an update. "Your testimony held. Others corroborate." I typed back, "Small things don't lie." Then I added to myself, not to him. "But they do ask you to carry them forever." That night, I didn't sleep. I wrote instead, a witness statement no court had asked for. I did not survive because I was strong. I survived because I was near a window. I do not testify because I am certain. I testify because the sound arrived before the breaking, and because a girl in a red coat taught me that beginnings must be protected, even when the end has already come. When the page was full, I placed it on my kitchen table and left the window open to the rain. The paper curled a little at the edges, absorbing weather like memory does. I imagine the jurors reading it someday, not as evidence, but as the thing that comes after verdicts, the part where people decide whether to build a world that does not require guardians like me. The verdict arrived on a Wednesday, the kind of day that looks undecided from the window light moving but not promising anything. We sat in the same room that had taught me how expensive certainty is, and the foreperson read words that were supposed to add up to justice. Liability established. Negligence affirmed. Fines that sounded large in headlines and small in the mouth of grief. The company's lawyer stood to say they respected the process, and the judge thanked the jury for their service, and the flags in the corners continued to believe in themselves. A soft exhale went through the gallery, a cheap kind of relief that lasts exactly as long as it takes to reach the door. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the strange, careful quiet you hear in a house after a storm roof intact, but every room knows what almost happened. Layla touched my sleeve as we stood. "It matters," she said, and I nodded because I had learned to let a true sentence stand, even when it didn't affix the broken thing. Outside, microphones waited with their polite ambush. The investigator took one, said all the careful words, and when someone turned to me, Layla stepped between us, not a shield, a hinge, and said, "He has given enough voice." We walked down the steps together while the lenses fed on other faces. Rain started in a disciplined way, as if it had been told not to raise its voice on courthouse days. We stood under the awning, not speaking, and let the weather make of us what it wanted. "What now?" I asked, and Layla looked down at her hands as if measuring their empty weight. "Now you go on," she said. And going on is never what people think it is. We kept a ritual after the trial. Not every day, not even every week, just often enough to teach time that we were paying attention. Sometimes we met at the memorial and replaced tired candles with new ones, the kind that promised hours they could not guarantee. Sometimes we rode the train one stop and back, because bravery without practice spoils. The first time we tried it, my throat tightened at the platform, and I could feel the rails under my shoes like a memory rehearsing. When the carriage doors opened, Layla went in first and sat by the window on purpose, the place I had survived. She hummed once two notes that failed to agree, and I joined her with a third that didn't affix them so much as accompany the disagreement. Around us, commuters performed their ancient liturgy of screens and sighs. I kept my hands open on my knees so the body would not mistake the ride for the old night. The train moved and the city slid past without consequence, and my ribs did not break, And when we stepped back onto the platform, I had to sit down because my legs had been holding a verdict of their own. "This is how we learn to live near it," Layla said. "Not against it. Near it." They asked me to speak at a small ceremony the city held by the river, a plaque in a tree, and all the names carved in careful lines that still could not contain them. I wrote a statement that refused to pretend closure was offered. I said that laws had been corrected and bolts would be tightened and budgets would learn fear, but that none of this translated the absence back into presence. I thanked the workers who had crawled through metal to pull us out, and I thanked the strangers who had written letters that taught me how language can aim at the dark and still be useful. I did not say miracle. I did not say healing. I said we had chosen to watch over the small things because they don't. Lie. The tremor that came before the breaking the thread on a sleeve, the sound a child makes when she decides beginnings deserve company. After I stepped away, Layla read the names without performing them, and when she finished, she pressed the paper into my hand like a passport for a country we would never leave. The company sent another letter, glossy this time, on paper that tried to impress skin, announcing the fund, the reforms, the independent oversight, the monument of their regret. They offered to include my words in their statement, to elevate survivor perspective, and I put the letter in a drawer where I keep warranties and maps for places I no longer live. I did not answer. Not out of anger, not exactly, but because some echoes are better left to their own diminishing. In the evenings I returned to the station alone, stood at the far end where the announcements sound thinner, and practiced telling time without flinching when the platform trembled. More than once a child nearby began a song and abandoned it, not from boredom, but from joy at the beginning itself, and those unfinished measures were truer elegies than any speech I had managed. Layla and I never tried to rename what we were to each other. Not kin, not lovers, not a project or a promise. We were the kind of people who know the same corridor in the same night. Some afternoons she would hand me a small object that had no business being holy, a paper clip from Aya's school folder, a button from a coat grown too small, and say, "Keep this until you forget you're keeping it." I carried these relics in my pocket until they stopped feeling like weight and began to feel like grammar. On her worst days, she would call and stay on the line without speaking while I read aloud from the investigator's updates, as if factual sentences could hold back the tide for a minute. On mine, I would sit on the church basement steps again after group and listen to the coffee urn argue with itself, and when I reached the street, she would be there already leaning against the railing with the kind of patience that doesn't need proof. People moved on, as they must. The memorial grew fewer candles and more dust. Newspapers learned other names. The city corrected the timetable and the rails, the budgets, and the bolts. New trains wore safety like a new coat, stiff at first, then comfortable. I learned to ride them sometimes alone. Not to conquer fear, fear has tenure, but to escort it, to teach it the etiquette of public spaces. On the worst anniversaries, the faces return. The old man with the folded paper, the couple who had been mid-whisper forever, Aya in her red coat. I say their names softly, out loud, and the carriage goes on not hearing me, and that is as it should be. I have stopped trying to fold my story into the word lucky. I don't even call myself a survivor, not when I'm being honest. I call myself what the rail made of me, a man sworn to the sound that came before the breaking. On the final evening of the year, I took the long walk to the river alone, and found the tree by the plaque, wearing a few stubborn leaves the color of someone trying to forgive themselves. I brought no flowers, no candle. I had a small notebook and a pen that worked in the cold. I wrote the same line on 3 different pages and tore them out one by one. Beginnings deserve company. I folded the first into a narrow boat and set it on the water where it shivered and surrendered. I tucked the second into the crack of the plaque so that the names would feel less alone when the city forgot to visit. The third I slipped into my pocket for the ride-home insurance against the moment. The rails might ask me again where I was sitting when the world tilted. At the station, the tannoy announced an ordinary delay, and a few passengers rolled their eyes with the exhaustion of people who think inconvenience and tragedy live in the same room. A child started to hum and abandoned it, and started again, and I held the unfinished tune the way you hold a match cupped against the wind. When the train arrived, I chose the window and sat without negotiating with my breath. And as the carriage gathered its speed, I felt what I always feel now. The small rehearsal of the old tremor under the new steadiness, the warning that made me the beginning I promised to accompany. The city slid backward, keeping its secrets. The glass collected rain. The rails spoke in their strict music. I did not close my eyes. I spoke the names I carry not as a list, but as a roll call. And when I reached Aya, I let the silence after her name be the longest, as if silence were a seat I had saved for her. The train entered the tunnel that owns my nights, and for a breath the dark returned in its old costume. And then we came out, and the windows filled with a brightness that had nothing to prove. The verdict didn't give me peace. Peace is not the point. What I have is a task that continues. To keep the small things honest, to hold the second before the breaking up to the light until the face of neglect is unmistakable, to hum the beginning with a child who does not finish the song. People will call that healing if they like. I will not argue. I will call it what it is, a way of living near the thing that chose me, so that those who didn't get to live at all still have a voice that remains. And when the train slows and the brakes sing their patient apology and doors open to let us out into whatever weather waits, I stand and feel the weight I carry shift, not lighter, not heavier, just properly mine, and I step onto the platform and I go on.